The only word I can say is it's obnoxious.
Well, you're not this type because you're da-da-da, and you're not that type because you're this. Projecting or questioning other people's type, basically typing them without their consent.
This is not limiting people's potential. This is limiting their character.
Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We recently did I think it ended up being like a 3-part podcast series on, does Myers-Briggs deserve its reputation? Because it doesn't have a great one, honestly. And we talked about why. We did a podcast episode on why it might not have a great reputation.
Yeah.
We talked about its reputation in comparison to the Big Five's reputation and whether or not each of those systems have earned either the vilification or the glowing reviews they get. And then we did one on how Myers-Briggs is great and you should be using it and why it won't die.
Just won't go away.
It won't go away because it's not a fad. It's more than a fad. It's a beautiful, complex system that a lot of people use in order to understand themselves and beautify their lives. And in the comment section on one of the YouTube videos, somebody asked, can you do a podcast episode on how communities abuse the system? Which, considering that we just talked about, why it gets vilified and we did a big defense, I think we could probably round out the system and maybe close it down by recognizing and acknowledging that not everybody uses it well. Like one of the reasons why it might not have a great reputation in some circles is because not everybody's been a great representative of the system.
You notice the person didn't say, can you talk about how some leaders are teaching it wrong and abusing it? They said how communities, meaning groups of people, meaning people that are learning it together or co-studying, the person wasn't reflecting or speaking to the fact that there's a bunch of people that are misteaching this and causing harm. And I think that's, if I take a step back, I go, there's actually not a lot of people teaching this online, except in a corporate environment where they're getting paid in like an office environment or a professional setting. I would say we and a few other channels are just a few of the, there's 7 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
And there's hardly anybody teaching this and talking about it in more of a direct audience way.
No, I would push back a little bit. I think that there are a few people who have big followings.
Sure.
But I would say that actually, particularly since maybe 2020, where people had a lot of discretionary time on their hands, there's been a lot of channels that have been developed and podcasts and
absolutely,
they're like actually I think it kind of feels to me, and maybe just because it's my profession, it feels like there's a lot of people trying to teach it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can appreciate that. I think it's always done in co-creation though.
I agree.
Or it's done for entertainment. Like I would think that somebody like a Frank James has been doing this for a long time on YouTube. He has a lot of popularity, a lot of videos. I don't think he's teaching the system. I think he's using it for entertainment, which is awesome. I think it's really cool. It's just fun to see the skits and the sketches and what he does. And he's seen a lot of success there. But I don't think I would consider him somebody, he's got a huge following, but he's not necessarily, I guess he does do some low-level teaching around it, but he's not trying to like build a business or an entire discipline or method around it.
He's not starting an academy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think Frank would even say that he's like sort of edutainment. Yeah. And that his job isn't to be the big guru. Yeah. But I think people do learn a bit, like through edutainment and through
what I'm talking about is there's no Ian Morgan Crone. That,
right.
The Enneagram?
Yes.
He became a New York Times bestseller. Like there's no... who's the guy that wrote Please Understand Me Too? Kiersey. There's no Kiersey in our time period right now.
Yeah, not right now.
There's no standout person or persons that's on the New York Times bestseller list.
Right.
That you could point to and go, they're misusing it.
Right.
And I think this is indicative to where the abuse and the harm is felt, is because there's not really a singular, there's no real body of work to go to. Like, that's the answer. Right. That's where you go. I guess the Myers-Briggs company, but they're not really, they don't have a YouTube channel to speak of that's popular in a way. People aren't going there to learn. Yeah. And so I think it's like when there's a vacuum of leadership, people try to do it for themselves.
Right.
Get together in committees. And I would argue that the fastest way to hell, well, there's two fast ways to hell. One is with good intentions. The other one is with committee.
Committees. Yeah.
And a committee with good intention is like double level of hell. It's like the 7th level of hell down there at the very bottom. Yeah. If you ever watch The Good Place, it's really it's really illustrated there. Yeah. So
weirdly enough, heaven is actually that.
So
committees
I think
with intentions.
I think I think there's something to be said that people get together and they try to understand this, but then it's, I don't know. I think therein lies the problem mechanistically in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because there's not a single channel. There used to be standards. In fact, I would say Myers-Briggs, the Myers-Briggs company, right? The one that's teaches people to proctor or administer the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I would say that they spend a lot of time trying to like make sure that people have a sense of ethic and code around this, right?
Yeah.
Some propriety around it. And then Isabel Briggs Myers, and who started APTI, the Association of Psychological Type International. There are what did Carol say? She's with APTI that there's like 17 different sort of rules or standards that they follow.
There's a bunch.
There's a whole bunch of them.
Ethics.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember the number. I want to say 17, but it could be as much as 34. Who knows? But there's all these ethics that they want people to, in order to be aligned with them, they vet people based on how they're using the system. And some of the people who have been the vanguards for a long time, they were vanguards pre-internet. And so now that there's like an internet time period where we have a tendency to do that online, we have a tendency to, what's the old sort of the cartoon where the person says, I made this, and handed it to another person, and the other person looks at it for a panel and goes, I made this. Right? Like it's like everybody seems to take it on as their own and see it as their thing. And so there's not, like you said, like a single person or single influencer or single leader or corporation or company or whatever. There have been in the past different institutions that tried to make sure that people were using the system in an ethical and responsible way, but there's not, and they still exist, but I wouldn't say that they are necessarily, they're not right now enough of a force to make sure it gets disseminated everywhere. But even if they were a force to be reckoned with, we don't even have to necessarily be referencing online communities. There are companies that really take to Myers-Briggs or friend groups or colleges or whatever. And there's no guarantee that they're going to use it well either. I mean, we think about it in terms of online communities because that's the world we live in. But it can be any sort of context or tribe or group of people that could be abusing it. And that's, it should be taken seriously, honestly, especially since those of us who love the system and are always like just really irritated by others poo-pooing it, we have to recognize that a person might have pushback because, I remember somebody telling me that Myers-Briggs ruined their marriage. And I'm like, well, how did Myers-Briggs ruin your marriage? But, yeah. And the story was, it was, I'll just say this, like in football, you don't lose a game based on a single bad call, right? You lost the whole game and then that bad call didn't help. So in the story of the person who like lost their marriage over Myers-Briggs, I wouldn't say that Myers-Briggs was the problem, right? It was like, it was a bad call, right? But the person in the relationship that started to get into it used it as a way to understand themselves, and then did the thing that sometimes people who are over enthusiastic when they first learn the system do, which is kind of use it to justify things that maybe weren't great, and threw it in their partner's face, and then it sort of either was the beginning of the end or the end of the end. I don't remember which one. But that person is real salty about Myers-Briggs now, and I can totally understand why. Yeah. So it's not just online communities. It's also just how people and individuals are engaging with the system. And there are some warnings, right? Like there's some red flags in how people can use the system. And then not only are they, anytime we abuse something, it's going to come back to us not good. So that's one thing. But the other is that now we are representing the system poorly, and other people will respond. Is
abuse the right word? Are we seeing abuse? That's a pretty strong word that we see a lot used these days. Is it just misuse? Is it just unethical? Abuse, that's a pretty intense framework to come from.
Yeah. So I think misuse is a good word. Yeah. And I do think sometimes people abuse the system. I guess to me it's misuse, and I have not looked this up, so I don't know if I'm right on this one, but misuse feels like a blunder, and abuse feels like intent. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that when I got into Myers-Briggs and some of the typologies, I mean, I remember very clearly when I got a neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, I purposely wanted it and other typology systems and other ways of knowing and understanding to have a one-up on other people. I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I wanted to know more than the other guy.
To have an edge.
Yeah, I wanted an edge. I wanted to be able to read people better than they could read me. I wanted to have this secret knowledge, the secret ability. Like, I know my motivation back then. Now it's different, but back then it was very much I wanted the edge. And I guess I think I could see myself misusing it if that was my intent, because I'm like, I want something, I want to get from it. I want to take from it. I don't want to use it in a giving way. I want to use it in a taking way. So I think when we approach this, it's probably how are we approaching the Myers-Briggs system in a way, right? How are we seeing it in our lives to be able to use it? And when we enter communities, because the person said, hey, can you talk about how communities abuse the system? Again, abuse seems like a strong word to me, but misuse, abuse, whatever, it probably can be pretty toxic in certain ways. I hate people feeling like, oh, well, that's because it's like one of those things like, well, I don't blah, blah, blah. Well, that's where that type would say that. Of course, it's like one of those, anytime anything you say is impenetrable because that's what your type would say.
Yes.
And, oh my gosh, that kind of thing would, like if I was starting out in this and someone did that to me, well, that's what ENFPs would say. Of course you disagree with this and this. It's like everything can be explained away by the thing that I'm disagreeing with.
Yep.
So it's impenetrable, and that is like maddening. And that to me would be the first line. Like I would consider that very much misuse and probably see it as abusive towards somebody to not let them see themselves. But that's my introverted feeling talking most likely.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of, there's a lot of those. Well, actually, we pared them down. We made a little list.
Yeah. You want to jump into it?
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump
Some of
into a
these
list
ideas
of, the biggest ways that people tend to misuse and or abuse, depending upon whether or not you agree with my definition of intent in there. And maybe it's not even intent, maybe it's impact, like how it's, feeling to the other person. But we are talking about people's relationship to the system. So I don't know if this is necessarily abuse on others, but it is at minimum, misuse of the system.
All right. So let's talk about this.
Okay. So the first one is using it as a label to box people in. So this is the number one complaint, right? Myers-Briggs puts people in boxes. And so this idea of boxing people in, actually, it can't, when I always say, well, Myers-Briggs doesn't do that, but people certainly can, and people using it, and they can use Myers-Briggs as an excuse. And so when you see it as a fixed identity or a destiny, right? It's like you said, people can throw around the 4-letter code and indicate that means, that means something very specific, and you can't grow out of that. When it's really supposed to be a tool for growth, so that you do grow out of any box, that you just keep growing and keep understanding yourself. That's the first one. The first one is doing what it is accused of doing often, which is putting people in boxes. Yeah.
I think another one that's just like that is putting people down to stereotypes. Mm-hmm. So mapping like, well, ENTJ isn't like a 4-letter code anymore. It's like a persona, almost an archetype in and of itself. The field marshal or something. It's like a very stereotypical, well, all perceivers are chaotic and late for work. All judges are organized, and like these generalization stereotypes we project onto people. Mm-hmm. And in both of those, I had 2 friends that, remember the Academy Awards when Will Smith smacked the crap out of Chris Rock on stage? Yes,
that will be something I remember for a long time.
I didn't see that live, but I had 2 friends reach out to me that know each other, that know I'm an ENFP, and like immediately, because I think they believe Will Smith's an ENFP. I'm not saying that yes or no to that. They have code that in their head. They're like, see, Joel, ENFP doing their ENFP thing, and I was like, wait, that's not. I wouldn't do that. Like I felt like stereotyped and put in a box, and I'm like, wait, like that doesn't feel good at all to have that happen to me.
Yeah, somebody you don't know takes an action, and somehow you're responsible.
Yeah, it's
in
like,
some weird
you
way.
would do that too, and I just like, no, I wouldn't. Like I was really offended. So I think stereotypes and putting people in boxes, I think these things are in tandem. This happens a lot, and I can understand a complex system. It's easier to reduce it to little sound bites and stereotypes and these kinds of things, because it makes it easier to understand. There's so many things to understand with the system. Yeah. That makes sense.
Exaggerated caricatures are I think it's how we all start out trying to figure out what all of this means. But if you stay with it and then project it onto people, even concepts like an INTJ is a mastermind, right? Like they're all masterminds. And there's a lot of INTJs, even when I've done this, like in early days, we would say stuff like that. We would call them masterminds because that's how we thought that we could get people to sort of understand these concepts. And then you'd have a bunch of INTJs going like, I don't feel like a mastermind. And
Or you meet an INTJ that clearly is not. And you're like, not all of them are masterminds, are they?
You mean an INTJ that is an INTJ that's not a mastermind?
Correct.
Absolutely.
They're more challenged on their abilities.
They absolutely exist. They for sure exist, that they are not masterminding anything, right? They're just trying to get through the day.
Yeah.
So there's definitely there's harm in that because, well, first of all, sometimes people struggle to find their best fit type because they don't match these parameters. And then also, like you said, somebody's gonna go, hey, somebody else that I think is the same personality type as you just behave badly, so somehow you're responsible for that. Somehow that's you too.
You would do the same thing.
Exactly.
I think another thing that people can misuse the system, and it can probably end up as abuse, is projecting or questioning other people's type, basically typing them without their consent. Right? That's one of the things we really talk about in our profiler training is this should be a co-creative experience. Get the other person to buy in on this. If you run around in a community, and we've seen this before, and you go, well, you're not this type because you're da-da-da, and you're not that type because you're this, and you should reevaluate this, and you start to just question and challenge everybody around you, I don't think that's really a very useful way of using Myers-Briggs. I think you've had this, Antonia. Just here on this podcast, people keep coming on, you're an ESFJ, you're da-da-da. It's like, you don't like that.
Yeah.
No one likes that. And so if you're in a community, maybe that's something you could check. Like, am I going around challenging everybody's typing of themselves? Am I typing without asking them or getting them to buy in on this?
There's some socionics dude, I don't even know his name, but he is insistent that I'm a TJ. Just insistent.
Oh.
And I'm like, first of all, I don't think he's ever listened to the podcast ever. He's just decided this. And then there was a video where I think I was talking about practical applications and how important practical applications are. And he's like, if I just know that, I just know she can't be a TP because she's talking about practical applications. I'm like, yeah, because nobody can understand that practical applications is like a good thing in your life. You have to have extroverted thinking to understand, that practical application is an important aspect of, integrating a system and incorporating it and maybe you building a profession around it. So it's happened to me so often. The reason why I mentioned this person is because they were like it kind of felt like they were following me around for a while, like trying to get me to understand this. I've had so many people just want me to agree with them and see that they're right about my best fit type. And I trace it back and I'm like, I was doing this when you were in middle school or maybe even elementary. Like I've been doing this since you were like a little kid. And I mean, that ages me, of course, but I think at a certain point, you sort of earn the right to just state your best fit type and have other people not try to undermine you or drag you down or whatever. So I've personally been on the receiving end of it. And it's really, the only word I can say is it's obnoxious. It's just obnoxious. And it comes from such arrogance. It's just so arrogant to do this to a person. The reason why we talk a lot about it in profiler training is because I find it personally offensive and I think it's an absolute misuse. And I could appreciate if somebody was trying to learn the system and they are around a bunch of people who are like nitpicking and coming at them and going, you're not the type you think you are.
Sure. And
trying to be smug and arrogant about it.
Yeah.
What a turnoff to the system.
Well, and I have to admit, I'm probably guilty of maybe every single one of these at one point. Because you're talking about being arrogant. I mean, I remember my having the early days when we were building the test for our website. I had my dad take it, and he came out a different type than what we had profiled him as on the test. I'm like, crap, it's off. And I told him it's like the exact opposite. He said, well, how do you know you're wrong? I'm like, I'm not. I just know. And I'm like, dear goodness, I was so arrogant. I was so full of myself back then. This is like, over a decade ago. I still wanted to help people. It doesn't mean I didn't have good intention. It was like I was over certain about something. And the more I've studied this, the more I'm like, I can't say things with such a definitive, like absolute framework anymore. I have to be open to say, well, this is what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I'm always open to things being different than what I'm seeing, but this is a pretty strong indicator. I feel more confident now, but I'm less definitive.
Yes.
Back then I was way more definitive. I was like, this is how it works, but I was a lot less confident.
Yes.
so as to cover the lack of confidence.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a natural thing that we humans do.
Yep.
And I just want to say that we're not here high, holier than thou, trying to be like, and no one should do these things. I mean, I'm looking at this list we came up with. I'm like,
Oh, yeah, I've totally done all these.
I've done a lot of this stuff, or I've had similar motivations. So
Yeah,
let's keep rocking. There's this yearbook notion of type, right? It's the most likely to succeed in the yearbook. So it's this using Myers-Briggs to predict, well, you're XYZ personality type. So clearly you're headed for a life of failure, disaster and struggle and pain and horribleness. But if you're this type, XY, ABC, then you're smooth sailing. Yep. You're not going to have any troubles in life. Everyone's going to love you and it's all going to go great. I mean, that's like really not a good use of this at all. The classic one is if you're an ESTJ or an ENTJ, you're automatically you'll never have money trouble. Yeah. Right. And if you're you're an ISTP, you're automatically going to be jacked. Right. Yeah. Or if you're an ISFP, you're automatically going to be an amazing artist. And so people of those types, they go, I don't really resonate with that part of the description, or that's not my life. Yeah. And then you get people feeling like they're failures if they don't fit some sort of stereotype. Yeah. So I think it, as a predictor of success and failure, is that's definitely a misuse of the system. And we have to remember, we're talking about cognition, the predictive nature of your mindset, how you're processing information, learning information, making decisions. We're not talking about behavior being predictable. Well, and how demoralizing to have your potential limited. Yeah. Right. Because somebody is projecting onto you success and failure, not taking into account your cognition. That's right. It really, I would say, the bigger indicator of success or failure when it comes to type is, are you matching the community you're a part of? Yeah. Because communities have their own sort of type energetic signature. And so if you're one that fits well in the community that you're a part of, you're probably going to have a higher degree of success. And that doesn't matter what type you are. So are you matching the community around you is way, way, way bigger predictor, or whether or not you're learning the lessons that community wants you to learn, as opposed to just your inherited cognition, like you said. You're not talking about the community that you might be engaged in with type. No. We started this framework from. No, you're talking about like the town you grew up in, your life, and your school, society, your town, your job, your family. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Your entire life community. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, meet space community. Not the not real virtual online version. Yeah. Another one is over-pathologizing type differences. Mm-hmm. So do we have examples of this? How would we see over-pathologizing a type difference? Well, of course you're irrational. You're an ESFJ. Or of course you're a crazy, of course you're emotionally unstable. You're an INFP. Yeah. Of course you can't feel. Of course you have feeling issues. You're an INTP or whatever. Of course you couldn't empathize. You're an ISTJ. It's like this is not limiting people's potential. This is limiting their character. Yeah. Like their virtues. Like you can't have virtues. And also you're going to be crazy in this way. Of course you're scatterbrained and can't figure anything out. You're an ENFP. So these are creating pathologies. Yeah. Of course you're going to go slap Chris Rock on stage. You're an ENFP. Hey now. You did that. That was you, right? So it's creating pathologies out of these types when, now, to be fair, at the point of origin in the book Psychological Types, where this all comes from, Jung did talk about some of these neurotic tendencies and things that you could think of as pathologies and problems and challenges, but they weren't from a person's natural wiring. They were primarily from one-sidedness, the inability to grow past them, and the inability to balance one's cognition out, which is a totally different thing than what the cognition is. So again, we're not just talking about what is, we're talking about how a person engages with it. Yeah. So the pathologizing isn't the type. The pathologizing is the relationship to type, which can create neurotic tendencies, etc. So that should be taken into an account, but that's a more dynamic and a lot more fleshed out way of seeing it than you're this type, so therefore you're going to have these problems. So it'd be like over-pathologizing left-handedness. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, left-handed people, they're terrible drivers, and they've let all these other implications because they're wired different than right-handers. Those are very sinister. I mean, there has been some pathologizing about left-handed people. That's where the word sinister comes from. Yeah, I mean, that's right. What just made me think that. And it's like the left-handed path, all this like alternative. Yeah. But really, it's just somebody that uses their left hand. Yeah. It's the dominant hand is on their left. Right. There's a bunch of narrative that comes from that. So we see that so simple in just a left and right hand. Mm-hmm. Now take that to something complex. It's talking about our psychology. Yep. type, of course we're going to pathologize it.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not an appropriate use of personality types.
Well, related to that is the next one, which is weaponizing it,
Yeah.
particularly in relationships. So things like, you can't, like, you're just trying to you're a judger. You're just trying to tie me down. I'm a perceiver. I have to be free. And so you're always going to be controlling because you're a judger type or something to that effect, right? Or like, you can't expect me to do this, or you're a thinker. And that, I mean, boy, I have to say, when we say I've done all of these, I would say that you and I have to work triplicate, double hard, triple hard, to not weaponize type in our relationship and in our fights. Like it's something, it's almost like this line in the sand that we will sometimes dance up to, but we don't cross. And every once in a while, I will feel myself wanting to use type to actually, no, that's not true. I have actually danced on that line. I have actually crossed it. And that's why introverted feeling is so maddening, right? Or you have FI, and I'll talk about how that's like not a good thing somehow. And really that's wildly inappropriate. But using type as a weapon in a relationship, which is once you have a shared language, man, it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do. And yet it's really hurtful. It's so hurtful.
Well, it can help you also form understanding. It's not just a weapon. I mean, I think in a relationship, it could be very useful. I think I've used it more in a relationship, more like helpless, like, well, I can't do that because I'm this inferior, blah, blah,
I'm
blah,
inferior, introverted, sensing.
I have this deficiency. So what do you expect? Like it's a way in a relationship. I've used it more to not get off the hook, but like get grace, maybe where I should have stepped up more, to excuse myself or excuse behavior. I don't think I do that too much anymore, but I think that's really where that's a very nuanced way of weaponizing it in relationship. It doesn't really feel like an attack, but you're still utilizing it as a tool to get out of some accountability. That's what I've done. That's how I've weaponized a relationship. I just realized that I'm talking.
Right.
It's to get out of the accountability that I could be held to.
Well,
how could I be held accountable? I have blah, 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 deficiency in my personality type. We don't think about weaponizing as like a defensive weaponizing. We always think of it as attacking somebody weaponizing, but that's just as much a weapon as you coming at me for something or me coming at you.
Yeah. That's pretty good self-awareness there. That's definitely something that can be used in a relationship. And I would say on top of that, I guess a related concept is requiring other people to accommodate your type without reciprocating. I'm introverted, sensing, or memory inferior. I'm SI inferior. So you have to accommodate that. But just because we're both SI inferior, so we both have this thing, but like, let's pretend you were a different type. But just because you're extroverted thinking, effectiveness, or TE inferior, well, you should still be able to deal with that. Like, get out there and go make more money, or go get a job, or go be more productive, or whatever it is I think I'm, trying to push you towards. You need to accommodate me, but I don't have to accommodate you, would be a related way of weaponizing it in relationship.
The other thing is just, we're staying here for a minute because I think this happens a lot. And not just in romantic relationships, I think friendships, parent-child relationships,
family,
employment, this happens all the time. The other thing you can do is like inadvertently, I could weaponize type by embracing like my feeling nature, for example. And again, kind of avoiding accountability, I could double down, be like, well, I'm a feeler. I get to emote however I want to emote, Antonia or anyone else around me. And then people are like, yeah, but I don't have feeling as high. So it feels assaulting to me, somebody might say. And I might not listen or be empathetic or sympathetic to it to go, well, too bad. I'm an ENFP. I'm a feeler. You have to deal because this is how I do my best work in my feelings and my emotions.
Yeah.
And it's not really attacking someone with it. It's not, I wouldn't put it in the category of weaponizing it, but you're certainly, that person's going to feel like it's weaponized.
Yeah. Like
you, if I'm upset and I can't get out of it and you slurp it up in your emotions, now we're in a relationship dynamic, and so mileage may vary, but you would feel very hurt and feel like I'm weaponizing it to you, even if that's not my intent. So we can inadvertently weaponize things by over giving ourselves permission and avoiding accountability to our behavior because we're like, well, that's how I'm wired. What do you expect?
Yeah, that's related to the next one. I think we're at 7. I don't think we've been numbering them as we've talked, but we are now at 7, which is ignoring development and growth. Yeah. Which is a related concept to what you're talking about, which is that's just how I am.
Yeah.
So we're using it as an excuse to stay stagnant, as opposed to as a launching pad for maturity and growth. We use it as our get out of jail free card to make it so that, like, I'm introverted thinking or accuracy. I just say what I think, and you're just gonna have to deal with it, even if it's painful and horrible. Like, that's just how I am. I just play devil's advocate. I'm just gonna tear your argument apart, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. That's not acknowledging the opportunities for growth in my cognition. And that's one of the biggest, that's why the system works so well, is it does give us a roadmap. It tells us what our growth path is, but not if we're using it as an excuse to stay stuck.
Yeah.
And then just tell everybody else they have to deal with it, because that's just how I'm wired. That's just who I am.
Yeah. So let's talk about lawsuits.
Okay.
Because number 8 is how you get sued.
Yeah, it's true.
And this is something I think the Myers-Briggs company has done a lot of work on in the last several decades, because at one point in the workplace, people in leadership, management, and hiring and HR departments were using it almost like an aptitude test. Like, well, this person can't do that job because they're a different type than that job needs. They would tie jobs or job functions to certain personality types and then disregard or look past people that weren't that type. And extremely unethical to do that. I mean, that's just like profiling somebody, like it'd be as bad as racially profiling them to use their type as a determination. I think a type can give us some help to understand how to manage a team, but it certainly shouldn't be the only metric or one of the few metrics we use to hire or fire on. And so we've seen that really the corporate side, especially Myers-Briggs, has done a lot of work on that ethics of this.
For sure. Or give leadership opportunities, or provide different growth paths in the career, in the company that you're in based on their type. It's like, we only hire TJs for our managers. Yeah. It's like, well, there's some TJs that are not that great of managers, actually. And there's some other types that are fabulous, and you would never expect it.
Yes.
So giving opportunities, growth paths, like basically profiling. You said profiling in the bad way, which is we will only allow certain types in certain positions, and that's like you're totally right. That one is almost done, right? And in fact, actually, documentaries have been made about this and how bad it is.
Yeah.
So that is definitely one that's no bueno, and that is a big piece of the ethics, is not doing that. But I don't think that happens as often anymore for the reason you stated.
Well, I think the antidote to that is co-create it with the person. They don't feel like they're being typed. They feel like they're part of a co-creative process to help them understand their best fit type.
Yeah.
That's why we teach profiling, right? Because it's such a superior way to a paper-based projection onto somebody when you have a dialogue with somebody, just like Carl Jung did at the beginning.
Right.
They understand what's going on, and they're part of it with you. Yeah. You're not just telling someone, I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you and make my decisions based on what I have determined about who you are. No, the other person gets to actually engage with that.
Well, and that's related to that idea, because you learn so much about a human. You learn so much about their story and who they are beyond just their type when you do a profiling session. You learn the individual and a lot about them in a very small amount of time. That's how profiling is designed, is to help you understand and see this person. And so that relates to number 9, which is overtyping behaviors instead of intentions, which is, again, this is related to that idea of typing people without their consent. Mm-hmm. This is staying entirely on behaviors and not recognizing that other things go into that, like demographics and culture and age and all sorts of things, right? Character. A bunch of things are a part of that, but you just see the behaviors. And this is a misuse, because it teaches people to use type to explain everything, including things that type is the inappropriate tool to explain. And when we first get into type, particularly if we've been bit by the bug, it's hard not to type everything and try to explain everything through the lens. This is actually a product of what you could call analytic introverted thinking.
Yeah.
So analytic is the more assertive style of introverted thinking, that cognitive function. And analytic introverted thinking tends to like a single system that it can filter almost everything through. And a lot of people favor analytic introverted thinking, even if they don't have introverted thinking as a favored function, even if it's a shadow function. And so anybody with analytic introverted thinking is going to have a tendency to want to use this to explain everything. And there's nothing wrong with having a favorite system, but there are limitations to it, and especially limitations around, projecting things onto people based entirely on their behavior when it could be a different source. It could be something totally unrelated that is causing them to show up in that way. And that's dangerous if you're trying to create good prescriptions for development and becoming a better version of yourself, when your diagnostic only will use this tool, and maybe even branch out into other things we've talked about which is pathologizing.
Yeah.
So you start using the system to explain absolutely everything. That creates over relying on very shallow criteria to help understand a complex human being. And then it's almost like just the very next domino to knock over, to start pathologizing things and using it as an excuse and limiting and starting to put people in boxes. So it's like the misuse in this way collapses everything and makes it really small. And the opposite is when you see it as one node in the system, it actually expands and makes things big and helps you understand things that are even maybe unrelated, but that's because you're not filtering it through this overly small perspective.
So that actually brings me to the next one, which is neglecting cognitive functions.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we've had to, unfortunately, because of the neglect of cognitive functions, it has made things even more confusing. For example, the term ambivert, I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast, we need the term ambivert to fix the fact that we haven't been talking about cognitive functions for 30 years. We've been talking about the 4 letters. So everything's binary. You're either an introvert or you're an extrovert based on your 4-letter code. You're a sensor or an intuitive. You're a thinker or a feeler. You're a judger or a perceiver. But we know the moment you get into cognitive functions, wait a minute, it's actually not about those 4 letters. It's about
all the things.
All of them. It's about which descending order they're in and how
Right.
certain I am and how competent I am at them.
Right.
And how accessible they are.
Right.
So we're all ambiverts. We're all introverts and extroverts. We're all sensors and intuitives. We have all of this in us.
We're all thinkers and feelers.
It's just, what am I bringing to the forefront? And so now, because we've had this, I would argue, more dumbed down version of all of this without the cognitive functions woven in, and for good reasons, we've had to add extra things that have made it only more confusing. Of course, it feels like you're getting put in a box if you have to be one or the other of these dichotomies.
Mm-hmm.
But cognitive functions unlocks what's actually happening. There
Yeah.
are archetypical energies running inside of us. And it's the order and the mixture of those energies that gives us our 4-letter code, that brings us to our type.
Yep.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. All the other things underneath are happening. So I think that's where if a community is only using the dichotomies or a very grossly oversimplified or misunderstood version of the functions, maybe over tokenized or something, I think you're going to have a lot of misuse and possible abuse in a community like that.
Yeah, and it's okay if you're first starting out or if you don't even know cognitive functions exist.
Sure.
So it's not necessarily a misuse if a person just is unaware and is learning over time. And I would say that if you don't continue to grow into it and learn that, but you're still insistent on the system, I think it will kind of inevitably lead to some misuse for sure.
Yeah.
But related to that isn't just not using functions. Related to that is the opposite, which is being aware of functions, but seeing them as isolated skills as opposed to interconnected dynamics.
You mean tied to behavior?
Well, you have introverted thinking or accuracy. So, somebody could say that to me. So they're like, you're always going to debate everybody all the time.
Or be good at math.
Or you're going to be good at math. Right. Exactly. Right.
Okay.
There's going to be like this assumption of how a person will be using it. They're dynamic. And my introverted thinking or accuracy is my auxiliary co-pilot function might be quite diminished if I'm in a context that didn't allow it to flourish. And so I might have very little access to it and I might need to grow more. But if it's just an isolated skill that a person has, and so therefore they're going to be good at it, or they're going to have these capacities, that again leads to, what it leads to is altered or skewed expectations, right? And I think I'm getting onto this thing. I think last year it really hit me how much having uncalibrated expectations really messes us up.
Yes.
In our relationship to ourselves and our relationship to other people. Having calibrated expectations, knowing where I should ask more of myself or others, knowing where I need to have more reasonable expectations. This was something we really talked a lot about in the self-love series last year right? How each
Yeah.
personality type can love themselves. And a big piece of that is setting reasonable expectations. But if you don't understand that the functions are dynamic and have different levels of expectations associated with them, you're going to beat yourself up where you shouldn't, and you're going to let yourself off the hook where you should be pushing yourself harder. So I think that's one of the reasons why that can turn into misuse.
Another one is making Myers-Briggs into a popularity contest.
Yeah.
I think this happened with INFJs. INFJs, I don't know if you know this or not, Antonia, but they're the coolest, most
The best.
purest,
That's
smartest,
right.
epic, most like, I mean, the way that people talk about INFJs online, it's like there's 15 types, and then there's the God type. And I'm not saying that INFJs aren't cool, but the way that I think people have kind of, I don't know if it's actual genuine. I'm like, come on, can they be that perfect on always? At the same time, you've got all this trauma and challenge as well.
Yeah.
So it's like a specialness.
Yeah.
And it's almost like if I'm an INFJ, I'll be the popular type.
Yeah.
I'll be the one that has all the challenge, but also all the awesomeness. And I'll be kind of like, I'll be the one special type among all the others. And I'm just picking INFJ. I know there's others that kind of have.
Oh
this
yeah, for sure.
emerging as
INTJs
well.
also have a big one. All right, they're the popular. They'll say they're not, but it's like, but they also do the same. You're not
I
a
think
real
ENFPs
INTJs.
sometimes have this too. Like, oh, cool. Like, there's this almost like ENFPs are suave and debonair, and can move through a room or a space, and everybody's their
fun.
friend, and they're fun, and they
Yeah.
never have any enemies. Right? I got
Yeah.
a lot of enemies now, but
Yeah. Does everybody hate ENTPs?
no.
I think I
We
actually
just don't want to debate you anymore.
I
Please stop
know.
debating us.
That's right. That's all you ever do. I think ENTPs actually fall pretty far down the totem pole. I think everybody likes ESTPs are awesome, but ENTPs, I don't know about those guys. That said, speaking to the INFJ piece, I have profiled people who, when I told them that I believe they had INFJ preferences, gave me pushback because they didn't want to be one of those people who thinks they're an INFJ but isn't really.
Yeah.
And that's the danger. The danger isn't just the popularity contest that INFJs are at the top of the food chain. The danger is that everybody else is a pretender. Fake, ISFPs are fake INFJs. I'm like, or they're just their type.
Yeah.
They're just ISFPs. So there's been a lot of gatekeeping around the type. And I think that's a piece of it, and why there could be some danger or some misuse there. And I don't want to be. I mean, I don't want to be an ISTJ, right? Or an ESTJ. I don't want to be an ESTJ. Everybody talks about how ESTJs are mean. I don't want to be heartless. I don't want to be an ESTJ. And it's like, how about you're an ESTJ with a big heart? Is that a thing? Yeah, of course that's a thing.
Yeah.
Of course it is. So I think that's why the popularity contest and the misuse can be very off-putting.
Yeah. I think that, I don't have anything else to say about that.
Okay.
I'll just say, and this kind of sums it up. The final one is
Number 12.
Ignoring the ethical use of personality type. We were at, I think it's actually in the recording with Dr. Dario Nardi just a few weeks ago. We were on the main stage of Profiler Training talking about making personality type operational. And he basically said, look, I'm cool with whatever we do as long as it's ethical. Like, just use type ethically. Anything that's used, if you're using type ethically, it's probably cool. If you're not, it's not cool. And so what do we mean by ethically, right? We've mentioned some of the things here, but I think that's really where people feel like it's misused and abusive if it's misused in an unethical way. And most of these things dip into that.
Yeah, well, and I think a part of this, and this is why anytime somebody has a business around type, I know this because we've had a business around this for 15 years. It's very common to be called a grifter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
okay with that.
Yeah. Is that because you're an ENFP? I'm the con man. That's actually something that I used to think a long time ago, which is kind of funny now that I think about it. It's like, oh yeah, they're the con men. No, they're just people. They're just people doing people things, and and then sometimes they're con men and sometimes they're not. So, but yes, you'll be called a grifter if you turn it into a career of any sort. And I suspect it's because people will turn it into a career a little too soon before they truly understand the system and its complexities. And then on top of that, and the challenge with that is when somebody ends up in a place of malpractice, which is offering coaching advice or offering services when they don't have a complete understanding of the system or enough to be able to give high quality advice or high quality coaching or high quality counseling. So the unethical place is having a theoretical understanding of the system, but using your theoretical understanding to give practical advice that may or may not actually work out.
Yeah.
And people buying into the system, assuming that, oh, you know about the system, so you can advise me in my life. That could enter some terrain that is not particularly ethical.
Yeah. So I want to be really clear here why we're talking about this. Is this Joel and Antonia saying, we know how to use this. Here's the 15, 12, whatever ways, 12 ways you listening right now are misusing this in the communities you're in, and those are bad and wrong, and these are wrong and bad, and you should do it our way.
And you should feel bad about yourself.
And you should feel bad. I don't think that's at all what we're trying to do. In fact, it's actually the opposite. I want to see these communities thrive. I want to see people use this. I mean, we gave that talk at the live event just a few weeks ago about making personality types operational, making it actionable. Mm-hmm. The whole point is we need to find more access points for people. And so I think this is the reason we're bringing this up is it dovetails into making it operational and making it actionable in your life, because you need to accommodate for all of this, because it can go off the rails really quick. And you have something to comment on that? Because
no,
I was getting ready to go on something else too, but go ahead.
Okay, no, I was going to mention I would say that the pattern is underneath all of this.
Yeah.
Is the word stuck kept coming up for me as we were reading all of them. It's being stuck at a level of understanding or stuck in a place where you don't want to use it to grow. It's anytime you're throttling yourself from maturing more or from maturing in your relationship to the system. Anytime you feel that that it's going to ask something from you, like it's basically using it ethically feels like using it like as a responsible adult. Yeah. Be responsible, and responsible adults, they grow in their learning, their understanding. They go from believing they know everything because they have a little bit of information under their belt to recognizing that they don't really know things until they've played it out in their life, that it has to be experiential, that it has to be infused in one's life, that you don't, in an overconfident way, go tell people that they don't know their type. And that, to me, whenever somebody does that, I just immediately clock them as under 30, right? Like you can't be over the age of 30, because if you are, you don't care what somebody else's type is. You already have your life. So this all feels like people sort of stuck in a place of not wanting to be responsible just in general, right? Yeah. It just kind of feels irresponsible.
I can see the age thing, maybe. I think people of all ages and types can get stuck no matter who they are. I don't think just under 30 struggles.
It's true. And when I say that, I just mean it makes me feel like they're kids. But sure, that's not to throw shade at anybody under the age of 30. There's plenty of people under the age of 30 that are quite mature.
Yeah, and I think they're with lots of understanding. And we have several in our community as well. So my dad used to. I grew up in a Christian household, and he was like a youth pastor. He'd go and sometimes speak at churches, like as a guest speaker there. And he would give this one talk on a regular enough basis that I really remember it. So my father's viewpoint, both my parents, but my father in particular, felt that the American church had lost its way and what it was intending to do, to serve and help people. He really thought that the church was misaligned and had missed the mark and kind of gotten too into itself. And I think he still has this viewpoint. So he would give this talk, and he would give this illustration, and he would ask everyone in the congregation if he gave this talk. He was trying to challenge people and get them excited about reattuning to the mission they were on. And we give this talk about a lifeguard shack as a metaphor or analogy on the beach that started up with a few lifeguards that were saving people's lives in the ocean. And it was very successful. They were saving a lot of lives. And so more people wanted to be lifeguards and come and save lives. And they started getting enough people to where saving people's lives was covered. And now they needed other things to do. And so they took the little lifeguard shack and they built a little bit bigger shack. And before you know it, more people started to show up. And then they started to put carpeting in that shack, and they started to make it more comfortable. And then more lifeguards showed up and said, well, we don't really need to save anybody. We'll be lifeguards, but only in name only. We won't go out in the ocean and save them. We're going to stay in the shack, and we'll help manage the shack. And it grows, and they get more detailed on committees and voting, and they make sure that the lifeguard shack is this amazing facility, state of the art. They're making sure they're in all the regulatory codes. And so we were like, you know what? We actually don't save people as much as we just have a safe place for people on the beach to come when they're cold and when they need comfort. And so they set up some little cabanas around it, and now they've kind of taken their eye off of saving people in the ocean, and they're just like letting people come and sit in the shade, and they're serving drinks, and before you know it, it's like Club Med, right? And no one's out in the ocean saving lives. Everyone's managing this institution that's developed on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say this to kind of show how things start off with good intent and their usefulness. And then they evolve into kind of a committee management later on. I think this is just an institutional drift. This happens,
Mm-hmm.
he was directing it toward like a Christian church framework, but you could look at any institution, any like startup or anything that's like got a good intention, good mission at the beginning. I mean, even like Google or Facebook, like they kind of, maybe not Facebook, but like Google kind of had some cool stuff at the beginning. Now it's like, it's a big corporate entity.
Yeah, they used to say that their motto was "Don't be evil,"
Right?
and then at a certain point, they just quietly revoked that.
Yeah, and I think that what cuts through all of this, if we bring this over, the analogy over to type, and this is why we gave the message: make type operational, make it actionable. Is if you're a lifeguard going out and saving a life, and you're willing to get in the cold water, like I'm the lifeguard, I don't get in the cold water, I just want to sit under the cabana. But if you're willing to go get in the cold water and do something with it, you're taking it serious and you're going to really understand what you're doing. Like you're going to understand about lifeguarding. You're going to know what that means. You're going to take it serious. You're going to build skill there. You're going to make sure that you're safe and other people are safe. Like you're using it for what it's intended to do. You're actionable with it. You're operating with it. And it cuts through all the BS. You're not going to be as interested in the color of the carpet in the lifeguard shack. You're out saving lives. You're out doing something with your life, with your career, whatever, in that lifeguarding format. So it prioritizes everything when you make something actionable and you remember what its intent was. Mm-hmm. So when we talk to our profiler training students, or we have our personality life path mentorship, we will encourage clients and students of ours to use this in your life in a real, tangible, actionable way. And I think if you do, most of this just fades away in the background.
Yeah, I agree.
So in a community, that person that left a comment on YouTube, the reason we're doing this podcast is to say to that person, other people that struggle in those communities, start making personality type actionable in your life in a real way, in your relationship, in your career, in the things you're doing, not weaponizing, but for yourself. And we obviously teach a lot of those frameworks on how to do that, because that's what we're all about, is making it actionable. And it will cut through all this. Mm-hmm. And it will give you good footing. It'll clarify why you're attuned to it, why it matters, like usefulness. I mean, I can't even be bothered by the things I was bothered with 10 years ago around personality types in the Myers-Briggs system, because I'm too busy teaching classes and using it, right? I don't have the time to argue around a theoretical thing, because I have to actually go on a call tomorrow and do group coaching with people, and it has to actually work. It's going to affect their lives in a real way. So I'm not as interested in doing an online debate on Reddit as I am in maybe reading another passage out of Jung, or talking to Dr. John Beebe or Dr. Dario Nardi or you or somebody else that's activating with type, because that's where I'm sharpening what I'm doing. I'm attuned to the ocean and the people that are out there that need help. Yeah. I don't really care about the color of carpet. Right. And I don't have a lot of patience for people that do. Now, I know there's value there. A lot of people like that. But that's just not my thing. And I don't think that's personality hackers' thing. Yeah. And so I think that if you're in a community that's actionable with type, I think you're going to see a lot of success, and I think you're going to not have a lot of these challenges. But if you're facing abuse or misuse, look and see, is the community a guard shack doing colors of carpet and cabanas and giving out drinks? And they're saying, I'm a lifeguard, but I don't get in the cold water, but I want to still call myself a lifeguard. Or is the community you're part of actually doing what it was intended to do? Going out, saving lives, activating the thing that it says it's there to do. Which one is it? And you might need to choose a different community. You might need to choose one that's a little bit more action focused and operational focused. Yeah.
Yeah. And it might sound, I mean, in the metaphor that your dad used, or the analogy he used, would that be a metaphor? I think it's actually technically a metaphor. So there's in that particular
allegory, is that
something in that
metaphor, allegory, analogy. Now I'm really confused.
Yeah, something in that area. There's in religious circles, it feels like that's the point, is that you're trying to save lives, right? You're trying to bring people to God, and that will save their eternal life. And
I don't mean to make the stakes sound that high on this.
Well, and type, it probably doesn't feel like type does that. But there are people who say that type did save their life, because it taught them something about themselves that they were feeling despair around, and it helped them not feel despair anymore. They felt understood and seen. So type doesn't necessarily, it's not the tool that will save everybody's life, but it is a tool that can have a profound positive impact on a person's life if they understand how to use it in a responsible, ethical way. Isabel Briggs Myers wanted to save the world with it. That's what she thought it could do. And Carl Jung wanted people to be able to get to whole self. So when we talk about what is the original intent of the lifeguard shack, the original intent is to help people get to whole self and to help create peace between those that are overvaluing their own experience and projecting things onto others that is inappropriate.
That's right.
And this is a tool that can do that. So I 100% agree. If you're using it with the original intent in mind, most of these things are after the sort of the beginning, sort of bumper. What are they called?
Of course.
The wheels that you put on the bike, that the training wheels. Once you're out of the training wheels time period, most of these things will not be as much of an issue.
And giving yourself grace, because I'm guilty of most of these.
All of them.
Right? So I don't think I'm sitting here saying anyone's bad and wrong.
Right.
I'm saying these are the things to keep in check. And I, again, say that activating it will cut through the BS.
And like I said, I still do some of these.
Yeah.
Like I have to actively not weaponize type when I'm in a fight with you and want to talk about how your extrovert thinking is driving me crazy or whatever. So I think it's, you're right. It's not just not doing them. It's like keeping your finger on the pulse of it.
Yeah. If you want to join us in making this active in your life or operational, I recommend, a couple actions. Come over to personalityhacker.com. First of all, check out an owner's manual for your personality type. We got 16 of them. They help you get into action around it. Understand how to get into flow, how to get into a growth state, how to get out of loops, how to get out of trauma grips.
Identifying major challenges common to your type and getting to the other side.
Creating a life that's ergonomic and tailored to fit you. Like, it's a good starting place, and it's a great place to start. So while you're there getting your owner's manual, underneath this podcast, we'd love to also hear from you. Could you make a comment, ask a question, or leave your story about what's coming up for you? Have you been in one of these communities that we've mentioned? What was the experience there? Maybe it was a fantastic experience. It was really powerful. You're like, I don't resonate with this at all. It was not abusive, was not misused. I grew, and here's the way I grew. We'd love to hear those stories too. This doesn't have to all be bad. I want to hear good, positive things. Mm-hmm. Both are useful. We can get a conversation started directly below this podcast to make it actionable. So that's one way you could take action right now, is start on an owner's manual, make a comment, like take action, and let's get into this. Let's start seeing how we can apply it to your life and the lives of the people around you.
Mm-hmm. And if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, lots of different Android platforms. And if you leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, well, it makes me warm and fuzzy and helps me keep going. So I'm always grateful when a person is willing to leave a rating and a review. You can also watch us on YouTube. You might be doing so right now. We have a video podcast. It's Personality Hacker is the channel name. So come there, like, subscribe, or hit the bell. That's how you subscribe, right? Like, subscribe, and comment, I think, is usually the 3 calls to action that I'm supposed to be saying. So please feel free to do so there and get a conversation going on that platform as well.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.